Time has expired. I yield back.
Has expired. I'm now recognizing Mr. Jordan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The previous, our colleague just talked about overheated political rhetoric. I would say the most overheated political rhetoric in this area has been defund the police. That slogan. That's certainly not coming from our side of the aisle. Mr. Lehman, let me just ask you this. This is where I was with my opening statement earlier. Just common sense things. When you defund the police, should you be surprised when you get more crime?
Broadly speaking, no. I would expect a reduction in police funding to result in, or be associated with an increase in crime.
Yeah, I think every American's there. When you don't prosecute bad guys, should you be surprised when you get more crime?
Depending on the definition of bad guy, no. Certainly, I think there are margins on which we could prosecute less, and there are margins on which we should probably prosecute more. But particularly with the heinous, serious, or repeat offenders, if you decline to prosecute them, you should expect them to continue to do what they've been doing. When
political leaders and leaders in the media say that rioters and looters, people who destroy buildings, attack police officers, and take property, when rioters and looters are called peaceful protesters, should we be surprised if that leads to an increase in crime?
I would be surprised if it led to sort of a large scale or longer run increase in crime. It certainly would contribute to sort of a decay in social norms. I think in the short run, it almost certainly places pressure on civilian and law enforcement authorities to spend less of their time and energy on responding to violence, responding to rioting, sort of to give up a police precinct, for example, as happened in Seattle. So certainly at the margins that can matter in some specific cases.
Well, yeah, if police aren't going to respond and they're just going to let it happen, doesn't that send a message that probably can get away with that in the future as well?
Sure, absolutely.
I mean, that's exactly what happened in the entire summer of 2020. What about bail reform? The left's bail reform efforts. When you have that kind of bail reform, should you be surprised when you get more crime?
A lot depends on what the bail reform does. You know, ability to pay bail is not necessarily the best predictor of risk of reoffending or risk of flight. Moving away from cash bail is not totally crazy. That said, how you design it matters a lot. If, as for example, in New York State, judges are unable to remand people on the basis of their risk to the community, that's a pretty poorly designed bail reform implementation, in my opinion.
Yeah.
If you're erring against keeping dangerous offenders behind bars, that's a bad way to do it.
I guess I always come from, you know, the message is sent. So if you have fewer cops on the street, I don't know how anyone could not conclude that's going to result in more crime. If you're letting bad guys out, not having the type of bail we've traditionally had, if you're not prosecuting violent criminals and other people who break the laws, if you're telling people that you can take up to $1,000 in merchandise and not get prosecuted for that, I don't know how that doesn't contribute to more crime.
Yeah, and it almost certainly contributes, and the question comes down to where it contributes and how it contributes. I think it is almost certainly the case. Some jurisdictions in California have seen an increase in shoplifting. Some jurisdictions in California have not seen an increase in shoplifting. We tend to blame that either on progressive prosecution or on California's changes to the felony theft threshold. We see similar changes in other jurisdictions that do not lead to large increases in shoplifting. My suspicion is in that case, there's an intersection of factors that prosecutorial strategies and the movement of the San Francisco PD and the lifting of the felony theft threshold all contribute to an environment in which shoplifting is easier to do. The costs of shoplifting are lower. And I think that's an example of exactly the phenomenon you're talking about. If you ratchet back the capacity of the criminal justice system, you should expect at the margins that the people who are most likely to offend will offend more.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I guess I always start from the premise. I don't, in my mind, bad guys aren't stupid. I mean, they're just bad. So if they see, oh, but we're not going to be prosecuted, we can go shoplift and not be prosecuted. There are less cops on the street. We've been, you know, rioters and looters were called peaceful protesters. In that environment, I don't know how that doesn't contribute to more crime. And that's exactly what we see. Isn't crime up in just about every major urban area, particularly violent crime?
Specifically violent crime, we also see large increases in motor vehicle theft, other kinds of property offenses, although not all property offenses, but yes, in general. And by the way, those kinds of offenses tell me specifically shootings and homicides is that it is concentrated among the most crime-prone populations, people
Right.
who are getting into thieves.
Yeah, and as Ms. I yield back, thank you.
Thank you for your questioning. Ms. Cicilline, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you.